Hello people of YouTube and welcome to the Curiosity in Advance 10th Anniversary Extravaganza. Normally, I just ask myself questions one year and I answer them the year after. But because we've been doing this for an entire decade, I thought we'd make it a bit special and also take a question from each past year and answer that one as well. In addition to that, we'll also be answering last year's viewer questions, so, strap right in or just put this on in the background because I'm pretty sure it'll be a long one. Also, don't forget to put a question for next year's Tom, 2024 Tom, in the comments of this video, and I will get to them in a year's time. Without further ado, let's go back to 2013.
So, question 1. Are you still doing YouTube? And if you are, do you have actually people watching your videos?
2013 Tom. Your hair was shocking, your accent was fake, and you had barely touched the tip of the iceberg that was going to be your YouTube career. Although career might not quite be the right word, but adventures, maybe. You were about to become part of an incredible community. You were about to meet your girlfriend. You were about to meet your business partner. You were about to go to summer in the city for one of the most fulfilling weekends of your entire life. And yes, you were going to have a little band of dedicated viewers. Right from the start, I had a feeling I was going to stick with YouTube for a very long time. And that feeling was so strong that I always found it kind of weird when my other YouTube friends decided to stop doing YouTube. Which, to be fair, they all have at this point, and that says more about me than about all of them. For me, there's always been a weird but persistent allure to YouTube as a platform that I cannot quite put my finger on. But it's kept me here for over a decade now, and I'm pretty sure it'll keep me here for quite a bit longer. If YouTube keeps existing.
And also, have you made that short film with George Reese about God knows what yet?
Fascinating question, and to be fair, I have no idea what short film I'm talking about here. But George and I now run a video production company together called Bigger Feet Productions, and it's kind of cool to see that that has been over 10 years in the making.
Please tell me that you started animating or doing some visual effects, because at the moment you really want to start getting into that, but Adobe After Effects seems like a big and scary thing.
Boy, am I grateful to my 19-year-old self for starting to dive into animation and After Effects, because After Effects is where I currently do about 50% of my actual work. Funnily enough, I only realized a couple of months ago that I am now at a point in my skills with After Effects that I can improvise, if you will. When I start a project, I can imagine where I want it to go and just dive into After Effects and do it instead of having to stop along every step of the way to figure out how it works. Took a little while to become competent at it, but it was worth it.
Do you have a driver's license? Because it is about time that you got one.
I'm just editing this question in because it's the first time of 3 or 4 consecutive years where I asked myself this. And I actually got my driver's license 3 years ago in 2020. And since then, I haven't really thought about it in the same way. It's just sort of weird how the stuff you yearn or strive for can become trivial after you've accomplished or achieved them.
What is your current source of income? You are currently looking for a job here in Thronheim and you're working to expand your freelance videography and photography stuff. How has that worked out? Has anything else come across your path? How do you make your money?
This one feels a bit odd because I've been living in Thronheim for the second time for a year and a half now, and I actually had a full-time job for a little while. But then just before the summer I got laid off from that job and got put right back in the position that my 2017 self had been in for quite a while, where I didn't have a job and didn't manage to find another one locally for months. As I said though, I have also been working with George for a couple of years building Bigger Feet, and we are finally at the position where I can take out a modest but full-time wage there. That also means that I can spend all of my working hours actually dedicated to Bigger Feet.
Have you for a while had a decent language learning routine? Because right now your routine is flaky at best.
I'm honestly kind of pissy at myself for not managing to do this whatsoever. I actually had a really lovely routine when I commuted into town. I took the train, and on the train into town and out of town, I would do Duolingo for 20 minutes each way. But since that routine is gone, my moment to do Duolingo is gone, and it just doesn't occur to me now. Do you still shoot analog film from time to time? I do not shoot film anymore, and I do not even edit the digital photos I take anymore. Instead, I've picked a film simulation inside of my Fuji X-T4, the one that I'm talking to right now, that I like, and I just shoot JPEGs with that profile baked into them. And that's it. It's good enough. But what I do is print them. And I have printed an entire photo book of all of the stuff I've shot this summer. Is your furniture finished? Well, yes, all of the furniture building I was doing in 2020 is technically done, and all of that furniture is being used extensively. I am currently sitting at my homebrew kitchen island on one of my homebrew stools. That said, I really want to fix the tabletop of the kitchen island that I'm sitting at, because the paint I used, or at least the finishing lacquer, is sort of weird and sticky, which is kind of gross, and it's kind of wearing and getting disgusting. So what I want to do is sand it down completely, scorch it, and then oil it. Just to give it more of a natural finish. I think that'll look really cool. I also just have heaps and tons of other DIY projects floating around my brain all the time. But we don't really have the space here. When I lived on my own in Sweden, it was fine for me to just turn my apartment into a wood shop for a couple of weeks at a time. But considering I live with someone and a pet, that's not really ideal right now. So I'm very much looking forward to the day where Signe and I live in a bigger house with a garage that I can turn into a more permanent workshop. Have you managed to travel anywhere that isn't to your or to Signe's family? Like, have you managed to go to any places for the sake of going to another place? Signe and I actually talked about this recently, how we never really returned to our pre-pandemic traveling habits. Of course, we go see our families every now and then, and we go somewhere for a summer break, but that's kind of it. Before the pandemic, we used to go to southern France every now and again, and we used to go to London, what feels like all the time. And I used to visit Ailey a bunch in Scotland, but at this point it's been 5 years since I've managed to do that, and that sucks. But we're saving up for a house. I'm saving up for another motorcycle that will let me travel further. We have a dog, which restricts our freedom a little bit, and both the cost of flights and the cost of living have risen quite a lot in the past few years. So there's a couple of contributing factors that mean we don't travel as much as we used to, a couple of our own making and a couple outside of our control. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't like to see more friends in more places more of the time. And on that bummer note, let's move on to the questions I asked myself last year and answer all of them. So hello, 27-year-old Tom. Are you still living in Thronheim? I'm guessing you do, but I'm also guessing that there are slightly more concrete plans for where you are going to live in the middle distant future. So are there any of those plans, and can you share them with us? Yeah, we still live in Thronheim, but we also have more concrete plans for moving south. Because of my layoff and the subsequent working full-time for bigger feet, I am no longer tied to Thronheim in any way. Signe still is, but the company she works for is a big consulting firm that also has offices in the south. So she's currently thinking of requesting an internal transfer after the New Year's. And after that, we only have about 3 months to wait out the cancellation period on the lease of this apartment before we can move south. So if all our plans pan out the way we are imagining them right now, we'll be moving south April, May time 2024. Do you still do bouldering? And if so, did you get any better? Just for my own reference in the future, you can currently solve about half of the blue problems at your bouldering gym, which equates to a level of 6A or 6B. Thereabouts. I will add that you aren't solving them very graciously, so if you are still at the same level but can solve the same problems with more finesse, that's also improvement. Yes, I do still do bouldering, but for money reasons. Unfortunately, I don't go quite as much as I would like to. The bouldering center I go to is in town, and to get into town, I either have to drive, which costs a toll of about 80 kroner, or I have to take the train, which also costs about 80 kroner. In summer, I ride my motorcycle into town, which I don't have to pay any toll for. That's one of the great pleasures of riding a motorcycle in Norway. But since it is currently -10 and there's snow on all of the roads, I'll be damned if I get anywhere near that motorcycle in the next 4 months. And all of those charges of 80 kroner every single time I want to go bouldering add up very quickly. I'd like to go twice a week. I go more like once a week at the moment. As for my level, I am still at about the 6s, although I do solve them a lot more elegantly than I did last year. I'm able to climb a lot more calmly now, partly because I've gotten quite a bit stronger, so I can take more time on the wall and think things through while they're happening. Have you undertaken any longer motorcycle journeys or done any motorcycle camping? You're currently planning on riding down to the cabin in June and meeting Frank at the cabin as he will come riding up and spending some time there motorcycling around that area for a while. And that's a fairly big trip, so did that pan out? Yes, actually. A lot of this can be seen in the monthly review for June and a few subsequent videos, but yes to almost all of these questions. Frank and I rode down to the cabin and back, and of course around the cabin area, which added about 1,500 kilometers to my odometer. I also went on 2 bigger solo day trips, one of 360 kilometers to the Atlantic coast and one of 420 kilometers to Hitra and Frøya. I haven't technically done motorcycle camping yet, but I just got a really cool little tree tent, which is a weird hybrid between a hammock and a tent. And I'm very much looking forward to trying that out for actual motorcycle camping next season. Along the same vein, do you still have your same motorcycle, the Honda CRF 250L? I do, which wasn't the plan really. I really thought just before the summer that I'd saved up enough to sell my CRF and buy a Royal Enfield in its stead. But then I got laid off, spent 4 months in looming financial peril, yada yada yada. Now I work for Bigger Feet full-time and I'm slowly crawling my way back. Who knows what next year will bring? I really hope it's a Royal Enfield. Either way, I do really like the CRF a lot and it's served me really well in the last 2 years. I'm just very ready for something that is more stable and slightly sketchy on actual tarmac roads. Because as much as I love exploring little gravel paths everywhere, 90% of what I actually do is just tarmac, and my CRF isn't really meant for that. Have you finally managed to eat that baguette by a little French river? No, we went to Germany as a compromise upon a compromise instead of to southern France. It was fine. It was really lovely to see all of the people we got to hang out with, but it rained a lot and there was no baguette. So I will be reasonably miffed if we don't make it to the south of France in 2024. And still along the same vein, have you and Signe done any more random local camping together? Very little, actually. We had a small outing with Frank in June where we just camped for 1 night, and then we had a very big hiking and camping in the mountain strip with Signe's mom and her husband just in September. But that one wasn't exactly local or random, so I'm crossing my fingers for more local and random next year. I didn't ask any language questions to myself last year, so let's do one again for this year. How's the Norwegian going? Because for the first time ever, you are actually getting a lot of real practice in with your Norwegian. Av og til det nesten like lett å si en nesten flytende setning som det på nederlandsk, og av og til tar det liksom 15 sekunder før jeg kan finne på et eneste ord. Det veldig avhengig av emnen, hvem jeg snakker med, hvordan jeg føler meg, hvilken vei vinden blåser. Det går greit, men som alltid kunne jeg ha gjort mye mer for å lære mye fortere. And as the tradition goes, what are the most memorable moments of 2023? The most memorable moments one. Let's go start off with 2 shite ones, shall we? So remember how last year I attended 2 funerals and said something about it feeling ominously foreboding of what was to come? This year, I went to another funeral, the one of my own grandma. The funeral itself was weirdly cozy, and I don't have a better way to describe it. It was just close family in a small room, sort of sitting around the casket while our stories were being told. There were snacks and drinks, and it was unlike any funeral I'd ever been to, but it was just really nice. That said, nice or not, I would quite like to have a 2024 without funerals, if that's possible. The second one is getting laid off. I can still, when I close my eyes, picture the Zoom call I was on with my 2 former managers sitting there delivering the news. Not a great one. Of course, ultimately the outcome of that is that I got a kick in the butt to do more for Bigger Feet and build the freelance stuff together with George. But the actual layoff was a bummer. On the flip side, of course, I can also remember very well the conversation I had with George where we decided that we were making enough money as Bigger Feet to pay me full time and to dedicate the both of us to it full time. So, you know, professionally this year was a weird mixed bag. One very random and unrelated core memory of this year was doing an insane dyno at a bouldering gym while we were camping in Germany this summer. The whole problem was very difficult and I didn't actually finish it. It was just the opening dyno that I managed to do. And I was so surprised about having done it that I just hung there and dangled, gathering my thoughts about what the fuck I just managed to pull off. Another one is of course the first big solo road trip I did to the Atlantic coast, and particularly the place where I stopped to have some lunch, which was, it wasn't necessarily beach, it was a sort of rocky outcrop, but there was no humans in sight. So I just sat there in the burning sun for an hour, in quiet, in peace, and it was just a delight. And of course, along the same vein, the motorcycle trip to the cabin with Frank, and particularly the first evening after we'd done half of our trip down to the cabin, we stayed on a campsite, and the weather was lovely, the food was great. We had a cute little cabin we were going to stay in. We had a great uninterrupted day of riding, and it just gave me this brilliant sense of freedom and contentment. So on that not bummer note, let's move on to the viewer questions you guys asked me last year. And also remind you to please leave a question in the comment for me to answer next year. Thank you. Len asks more or less, what have I done for myself in the last year? I have a lot of hobbies, and I don't necessarily consider my hobbies directly self-care, but they also aren't really meant to impact anyone else directly. So I guess the stuff I'm thinking about is motorcycling or playing video games or printing the photos that I shot last year and putting them in a little photo album. They are mostly just activities for me and they don't really impact anyone else beyond maybe Signa living with someone who is vaguely content about their life and getting homemade bread made for her every week. George asks, what is the most important or useful lesson you have learned in the last decade? I have a few that I could think of and didn't really want to pick a favorite. So first up, I now have a motto to live by thanks to my favorite podcast, Dear Hank and John. And I know this motto is wider spread than just Dear Hank and John, but they are just how I learned about it. And that is, not my circus, not my monkeys. And this to me just means leave alone what doesn't directly involve you, which works particularly well for avoiding discourse on the internet. Secondly, I think I have a core belief now, which is kind of weird, and that is everything is a spectrum. And I'm not just talking about sexuality or gender, but goddamn everything. Some trees lose their leaves faster than others. Some people have a quicker metabolism than others. Some spiders make more intricate webs than others. There's 1001 evolutions of every major religion, and every single individual who subscribes to any one of them has a different level of conviction. The big problem with any core belief is that it seems extremely obvious to the person who believes it. And the bigger problem with this one in particular is that thinking in spectra and randomness is a lot less gratifying to our inner caveman than just thinking in binary. So a lot of people just clutch onto their inner caveman. And thirdly, sorry George for all the rambling, this is not really an important lesson I've learned in the last decade, but just something I really believe in. I think media literacy should be a mandatory subject in everyone's schooling from the moment they enroll to the moment they graduate, possibly with enforced refresher courses after you've graduated. The world would be a substantially better place if people were more competently able to parse information and how it's shared and presented. Moving on to Liz's question, which apparently is very important. What is it like having me stay in Thronheim for 6 months? Well, I'm sure alternative universe Liz and Tom are having an absolute blast. But in the actual universe we find ourselves in, you have exchanged to the south of Norway instead of to Thronheim. I think you're having a good time there though, and you are also coming up to visit us in January, which I am really looking forward to. From an anonymous viewer, how are you so handsome? Genetics. The same genetics that have started me putting through male pattern baldness, so come back in another decade to see how your question holds up. And remarkably and unbelievably, people of YouTube, that was it for all of the answers to questions from the last decade, to questions of last year, to questions you guys have asked me. Leave some down in the comments for next year, please. And I will go and ask myself some questions for next year as well. So, 28-year-old Tom Have you actually moved to the south of Norway? Did you sell your Honda CRF 250L and get a Royal Enfield? And just to tack on a little bit extra, have you ridden anything else of interest? I'm guessing you'll have at least tested Frank's new Bonneville, but last year you also went and rented a Honda Grom, a Honda Monkey, and you test rode a Husqvarna Svartbilen 401. So is there anything else you've ridden? How do you like that weird little tree tent you bought? And did you get to use it much? What is the status with Bigger Feet Productions? And have you been able to visit George and work together in Linköping for a bit? Have you done any new furniture building? Just an overarching language one. How's your Norwegian going right now? And have you picked your French back up? Speaking of French, and for the third year in a row, have you been able to visit France? Finally, and have that baguette and that croissant that you so deeply crave. And of course, as always, what have been the most memorable moments of 2024? And that will do it for the 10th anniversary edition of Curiosity in advance. Will we be doing this in another decade? Who knows, but I hope that you guys are along for the ride. And once again, don't forget to leave me a question for next year in the comments below. Thank you ever so much for watching. Don't forget to push some of the positive buttons down below as well. And I will see you in the next one. Ciao!